This is a Going Back, Remembering UGA interview with Miss Betty Russell Vandiver, conducted by Fran on May 20th, 2008, at her home in Livonia, Georgia. Ms. Vandiver, thank you so much for allowing us to come and visit today.
Thank you, Fran. It's been a joy just thinking about UGA for a while.
A good excuse to remember, isn't
it? It is. It always is.
You know, it's always a challenge to know where to begin, but let's start. I mean, we have such rich material to cover here. But let's start at the beginning. Talk about the Russell household and the family growing up in Winder, Georgia.
Well, Fran, I've always said that I'm the luckiest person in the world because I feel like I had the ideal youth. You know, we were in a small town. It was a small school. My mom and daddy, they were I thought, the best in the world. I had brothers and sisters later. I had a sister when I was 11 years old, which now is my best friend almost. But anyway, I grew up in the town where you went by the drugstore and I was reading Terry Kay's book the other day, but went by the drugstore for a piece of lemon pie. You had your friends, the cheerleaders, the football games, all those wonderful times growing up just couldn't have been better. So I just feel real lucky because between the church and the high school, you had all the same friends, and so you were with them all the time.
One of those wonderful Norman Rockwell.
It really is. I feel so lucky because I had the small town influence, and it was one of those things where you say, they laugh and say, you know, if you do something, your mama knows it before you get home. Exactly. Because the neighbors saw it and told her.
Right.
Well, that's the way it was. And Winder it was wonderful.
It's a good thing. So, of course, you arrived to find yourself part of one of the most distinguished families in the state of Georgia. What influence did the Russell name have on you, the idea that public service?
Well, public service, yes, but you know, my mom always said, well, now you know you have to behave. You just cannot. So I had it. It was kind of a double thing, a kind of a weight at times, but you were well aware that there was something a little bit different because not only Uncle Dick, but all my uncles had done well, and the women, Aunt Anna was the first woman lawyer in Georgia, and went to Washington with a job. You know, really, I mean, and they all were an inspiration because we grew up, our mamas and daddies almost, they talked about your aunts and uncles, and you knew them better than now, that people know their families. So. But I was lucky because I had a lot of, and Mom and Daddy believed in visiting your uncles and aunts. And so we always laughed and said we didn't know where they wanted to get rid of us for the summer. But they really did enjoy us getting to visit with our aunts and uncles and knowing them differently so that they knew us too.
Lots of character development.
Mm-hmm. I guess you call it that. It just was being with them and seeing how they live. Okay, there it is, Bill. That's why. Did you see it?
Oh, I think as I read a little bit about the Russells in Sally Russell's book about Mrs. Ina Dillard Russell, to learn that your grandfather then was sort of the patriarch, and there were 13 Russell children. Senator Richard Russell was the first boy. There were three girls, right? Mm-hmm. And then Senator Russell.
Well, interesting thing, he was in Franklin County holding court the night that Uncle Dick was born, and this is Franklin County, and yes. He was over at the courthouse. And this desk came from the courthouse. And so I just think it's really something, and they said he got in a wagon and rode all the way from Connsville to Winder that night.
To see that new baby boy.
Uh-huh.
Time to have a boy join the group.
Yes, but and you know they had 15 children. 2 died consecutively, which I think would have, you know, just
terrible,
broken your heart. And then to go ahead and have 5 more, however. But
what a strong lady.
Oh, she was. Well, that's it. We finally one time we asked Uncle Alec, who was the doctor. We said, "Well, what was wrong with Grandmama? What did she die of?" And he said, "You know, we'll never know. She just gave out, because the last 3 or 4 years she was bedridden."
Right.
And So.
Well, I think 13 children.
That'd wear me out.
I would agree with that.
Oh.
Well, Betty, after that wonderful growing up time, you took off and went to Virginia for 2 years to Sullins.
I did, and how I did that, well, that's another story. See, I had been Uncle Dick's daughter, my Uncle Dick's niece, my daddy's daughter, and by that time he was the judge.
Right.
And so I had been somebody all my life, and I thought, well, I'll just go to Virginia and get up there and go to school and be me.
Be my own person.
Exactly. Well, the first day I was there, Dean Metz, who was in charge of the whole school, called me in and he said, Miss Russell, I'm sorry your English grades are not good enough to be in my class, but I just wanted to tell you I was in school with Dick Russell. And I thought, well, all right, you cannot get away from it. But those were the 2 best years. I loved that time in Virginia.
Wonderful at Sullins.
Yeah. It was during the war, and it was all girls, and there was nothing, it was just a wonderful experience. And I still keep up with a lot of my
good friends
Sullins friends.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And Sullins was a 2-year school, right?
2-year school, and I just got a general diploma because I knew I was coming to Georgia for 2 years. I think my daddy, I don't remember him insisting that I go to a girls' school like Ernie did, but I did go 2 years and loved it.
And I had good friends that went to Sullins. Sullins is not there anymore, is it?
No, it just breaks my heart. We went back for a reunion, our 50th reunion, and it had a kindergarten in it now on the first floor. I mean, they had used the buildings, but it was certainly not a.
That's a heartbreaker, isn't it?
It is. It breaks your heart because Virginia Intermont was our rival in Bristol, and it's still there.
Yeah, I hear you. You came back to Georgia, came back to the University of Georgia.
I sure did. Couldn't wait.
Talk to me about what the campus in Athens at the University of Georgia looked like in 1945 when you started school.
Well, I felt like it was just a little closed area. I lived in Lucy Cobb and rode the bus every day. We had a couple of people in town that would come by and pick up girls on the sidewalk and take them. And I know Claude knows who I'm talking about, but anyway, Henry Cobb would come by and pick all of us. He'd pick up a load of girls and take them downtown to the arch, and then you got out. And either that or get your bus, because nobody had cars. Now I think about how many hundreds, thousands of cars there are. Nobody had a car. And so you either rode the bus or you waited for Henry to come by and pick you up. But it'd just be 25, 30 girls standing on the corner there at Mivage and Broad. And somebody'd come by and pick you up. And the people in town were nice and pick up girls and take them to
campus?
To the arch and leave them. I mean, it was just such a load up and go. And that's the way when I was at Lucy Cobb, that's the way we got to town most of the time.
So your junior year, you were living in Lucy Cobb?
I went there my first quarter. I love school. I didn't study. It was a fun, wonderful time for me. But Lucy Cobb, I lived there for 2 quarters, summer quarter and then fall quarter. And then I moved over to Mary Linden. And I loved Lucy Cobb. It was just the ideal place because it had a cafeteria. You didn't have to go to Snelling or wherever. You had a place in your dorm.
Go right downstairs and have some lunch.
So it was just real convenient.
You talked about if this would have been summer of 45 when you started?
Summer of 45.
So the war was winding down, but there still weren't any boys, were there?
No, not many. Actually, they were the ones that came back were mostly GIs who had, the boys that you met were GIs coming back to finish their education because they had been drafted or had joined the service while they were at Georgia, so they came back to finish. So that was nice, and then of course my brother and I were there at the same time, so that was good.
I guess by your senior year there were more.
Oh yeah,
more
it was picking up. It was fun because back then you could have you tried to have, or you wanted to have, a boy in nearly every fraternity. Because there was always dances every weekend, and one weekend would be KA, one would be Phi Delta, one would be SAE, and if you knew a boy, if he invited you, you could have a dance every weekend, and it was just a lot of fun, you know, and nobody was serious. You didn't have to go steady. You just dated different people.
That reminds me of a question. Was little commencement still going on when you?
Oh, yes. But you know, I never walked around the football field at homecoming because it had gotten so crowded that you couldn't get everybody on the field, and that was the year that they did it, but they didn't really want to, but everybody insisted they do it, and it was really just too much of a hassle. So I never walked around the football field.
We're going to have to give you an opportunity to walk around the field sometime.
I probably couldn't make it now.
I bet you could.
I don't know.
I bet you could.
Oh.
What about North Campus? Were most of your classes in the North Campus area? I guess Park Hall and LeConte probably by then were maybe the...
Well, I remember, actually, I was a sociology, psychology major, and most of my classes were in that north corner up there. I can't remember having any classes except one across from Mary Lyndon, and that was my senior year, and I remember what class it was, but I remember it was convenient. But then I lived in the sorority house the last year. So therefore, see, I was in Mary Lyndon like 2 quarters maybe, and loved it because Miss Lois Lampkin was one of my favorite people.
That brings up another good question. What kind of, who were your favorite faculty members, or the people who were influential, the people that you...
Well, Dr. V.O. Williams was the sociology professor, and he was head of that department. I loved him. And actually, Claude, who is the man who taught geography about our time? And he was Monday?
Prunty.
Merle Prunty?
Yeah, Merle Prunty. I loved him. I just thought he was cute as a button. And of course, I took geography thinking we were going to study countries and maps, and we ended up studying weather. And I didn't know a west breeze from and a middle, the way the lines are divided up. I didn't know boo. So but that was my last quarter, and so I just kind of did the best I could.
Glad to see that one finish up. Let's go back and think again. Some of the characters on campus, some of the faculty people. How about Dean William Tate?
Oh, bless his heart. Well, you know, he was there forever, and then being married to Ernie, and we were still a big part of the university at that time. Then we got to be really good friends. You know, I just love Bill Tate. He just...
You know, everybody has a Dean Tate story. I think he was a person that absolutely had an impact.
Well, I don't think my story about him has to do when I was at the university, but it was when he decided that he wanted to go down the Oconee River camp out all the way from Athens, Georgia to Darien, Georgia, where the Oconee runs into. Well, I just think that is the most fascinating story for anybody. He wasn't a young person either. I mean, this was after I got out of Georgia, so he had to be, I don't know how old he was, but just the idea of that man getting on a raft or some sort of boat and going all the way on the Oconee River all the way to Darien just fascinates me.
Had some interest in...
and he said the mosquitoes nearly outdid him. Thank heavens, I didn't ever have any encounters with Dean Tate, but a lot of people did. He showed up in a lot of places that you didn't think he would.
I tell you what, from all the stories I've heard, it sounds like he was the kind of person that you respected, you didn't want to get in trouble with, but if something happened and came up, he was there to help.
He was there before anybody else. Whatever happened on the campus, it seemed like Dean Tate just appeared.
Get you out of jail, or
yeah, and just
shoo you out, but
help
get
you get
out. Right.
I guess, but he was really just a remarkable character, and as I say, we got to be good friends instead of just Dean Tate that you kind of hoped he didn't show up when you were where you were not supposed to be.
Well, you moved into the 80 Pie House your senior year.
Uh-huh.
What was life like in a sorority house in 1946-47 at the University?
Well, as a matter of fact, it was so small. You know, we didn't have, nobody had dormitories attached to the house. And I think there were only, maybe 30 girls. And of course, the sororities weren't that big either. I mean, I think back then it was maybe a limit of 75 that you could have in the house and on the campus.
Right.
Because it just wasn't as big as it is now. So it was fun. It was like a little close-knit family. Of course, I was in a room, there was 6 of us in double deckers, and I still keep up with a couple of them, but it was fun and never a dull moment, I'll put it that way. I was going
to say, you talked a little bit about the social scene. So on campus, the Greek system was primarily where the social life came, and
that's about it. Actually, as I said, the fraternities, there was always somebody having a dance on the weekend. And then little commencement, of course, was tremendous. It was a big thing.
You brought in the big bands?
Yeah, and let me back up and say, you know, Ernie was president of Panhellenic, I think for 2 years. And he brought in Charlie Spivak and several of the people who just, at the time, they were just getting started and they went on to be big stars. Yeah. But they would have a tea dance and then a dance that night, and then you'd have a breakfast dance the next morning. There were 3 dances that went with a little commencement, and then the big football game on Saturday afternoon.
Well, now, did you go with a different date to each party?
Yeah. I don't remember. Yes, we did have different dates. Sometimes you might have had the same date.
My Aunt Martha, who would have been years before you, talked about little commencement and said you never wanted to dance with the same boy the whole night. That meant you were in
deep trouble.
Yeah, you were.
But you didn't, the dates, I don't know. I remember having different dates for the different dances.
3 in one day, I think that's...
No, just 2. Just an after tea dance,
right.
And then a night dance, and then the next morning you had a breakfast dance. Oh, I don't know what they called it.
You know, they used to call us a party school in the last 20 years. Y'all were a party school in 1946, 47.
We probably were. You know, really, when you look back on it, but you didn't realize it. You were just...
having fun.
Having fun, and it really was so innocent. And now when you read a lot about what goes on, it's...
It is.
It really, they don't know what they're missing because it could be so much better.
So fine. That's a great quote. What did the fashionable co-ed wear in 1945-46? Do you remember?
Saddle Oxfords, full skirts, had a lot of sweaters with little white collars coming out of them. And for the dances now, see, you had to have long dresses.
Was every dance a formal
The
dance?
night dress was formal. The boys didn't wear tux unless they wanted to. But the tea dance, you wore a tea dance. You could close your eyes and think of a tea dance dress. And then for breakfast, well, see, we never wore slacks. We never had, didn't wear pants. You had skirts and you had had dresses, but you didn't have any slacks. Not like it sounds like that'd be perfect place for a breakfast dance, just to wear your slacks. You didn't
get
have
to do
them.
that.
No, you could not wear them.
Even when my first couple of years in school, you had to wear a raincoat over your gym
Exactly. To go to PE, you had to wear a raincoat. So
it has changed.
Times
it has changed.
You are absolutely right.
Were there any Athens hot spots? When you went downtown, did you go downtown? Was Costas still there when you were in school?
Where was Costas?
Costas was in the bottom of the Southern Mutual building, and it was maybe an ice cream.
I remember the name, but I don't ever remember going. And see, girls couldn't go to the varsity.
Right.
And the varsity was right there on the corner across from the Arch.
How about Moonwind Drugs?
Moonwind Drugs was there, and there was a Rib Shack.
Okay.
Something down in the bottom of Broad, maybe
The Pig, was the Pig there at that time?
Well, Parsons was.
Snack Shack, I'm trying to think of
Snack Shack was the one down in Broad and
Uppy's.
Uppy's, yes. Now where was Uppy's? Down in that same hole?
Uppy's was on the corner of Alps and Broad, I think, wasn't it? Wasn't it, Claude?
Alps and Broad. Well, I remember Uppy's, but I hadn't thought of it in a long time. Gosh. Now we did have the movies. We went to movies. The Georgian was there, and so was the.
Was the Strand there?
Is that the one that got to be? The Palace was the big one on that street, and then I guess the Georgian was the other one down on the block down.
Athens has changed.
Oh, I don't remember any, and I guess we had to be in 11 o'clock anyway, so it didn't matter. But I don't remember all these night spots that they have now. And I don't think we had them. If we had
some
them,
of us in this room don't go downtown after 8 o'clock at night. You can't walk on the sidewalk. So.
Well, I think that's probably
Bill
true.
is probably the only one who's young enough to do that.
Oh, and he wouldn't do that.
Anything else you remember about you that jumps out at you about your time at the University of Georgia? What current events? I know it was the end of the war.
Well, see, the end. Roosevelt died. I was thinking about that. Roosevelt died when I was at Sellens.
Right.
And it was for him to die in Warm Springs, and for all of us in the Georgia Club to feel like he was ours anyway. It had a huge, and it was funny because the radio station in Bristol had burned, and they had moved all of their facilities to the Sellens radio department, and they had a ticker tape outside the studio, and we were coming in from a basketball game, and I can still feel it, and we came around by the ticker tape, and it was just going madly, and it was that the president had died at Warm Springs, and it was just the most. Well, my children teased me because he was the only president I ever knew, for so long, and right now I'm enjoying that PBS thing. Have y'all watched that?
That was wonderful.
Oh,
last
it's
night,
just wonderful. And so I'm enjoying that, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm going to buy it because I want my children to know what he did from the time he was elected until he died. And I found out some things that I'm not sure I would have if I'd been old enough to think about it. I didn't understand a lot of things he did now that I'm seeing it, but I would love for my children to know what all he did do.
Well, what a huge impact. Then there was the train that went across the country with his.
And see, I was in Virginia, though. I mean, I guess I was so far west in Virginia that you could get out of those hills. No, you could not.
So, end of the war, GIs returning home.
Oh, well, that's interesting. On the VE Day, my daddy was being sworn into Sphinx. And I saw him in the parade from the Georgian Hotel going toward the campus. And I rushed out to tell him that the war was over. And my daddy was such a serious person. I'm sure he just didn't realize what I was saying. But he was so intent on what he was doing that he told me later it didn't sink in what I was saying because he was intent on Sphinx, walking down the street. And he didn't realize I was telling him the war was over in Europe.
That's an interesting note.
It's a good, I think about those kind of things, and I'm just glad I was there and I remember them,
Let's talk about Governor Vandiver. How did when you first saw Governor Vandiver, you were in high school, I think you said.
He was a new lawyer in town, and he was so good looking. But that's as far as it went.
And you were in high school, and he had come, and this was in Winder.
He was waiting for his, he had joined the Air Corps, United States Air Corps. Air Corps was what it used to be. Anyway, he was waiting for his class to be called in, and he came to Winder to practice law with Judge Gwillian, who he was with back when he came waiting for the service, and I was in high school. Then he came back, and that's when we started going together. after the war.
So he came back to practice in Winder?
And I thought we were going to live the rest of our lives in Winder, Georgia. It didn't work out that way, but.
Tell us about that first date where you all could hardly speak a civil word to one another.
Oh, well, that's back in the year 45 or 6 when they had like 18 people running for governor. And he was such a Talmadge man. And being a Russell, I had never been a Talmadge person. In fact, I was not a Talmadge person very vehemently. And so therefore, we argued. But I had already picked Hoko Kelly because he was from Lawrenceville. And I just thought, well, he was the one. I didn't like anything. I didn't know enough about any of them, so I just picked one to be for. And so we argued politics. Our first date, that was back from Mary Linden, when Miss Lois just called up and said, please come down here and go to the varsity with these boys. And so we did. My roommate and I went down and went to the varsity. And we argued politics the entire night.
Well, he came back from the war.
And he was
decided it was all right to ask you out then because you were out of college.
Yeah, because I was out of college. And that's unusual too, because Daddy said, honey, you've been going to school since you got out of high school. Why don't you go back to Georgia and enjoy the spring semester? And I said, no, I think I've had it. I'm through with school. I'll just wait and go get my diploma in June. Well, I had my first date with Ernie on May the 1st, and I'd gotten home like the last of March, and he had come in to Winder to start practicing law. So I just think it was meant to be. You know, it's one of those situations that just meant to be.
How fine. Let's talk about the political arena a little bit. Certainly you were comfortable with that. You'd grown up in a family committed to public service and certainly one comfortable in the political arena.
Oh, I was comfortable, but it's just my way of growing up, I guess. You know, I had been aware of politics and aware of the different candidates. And of course, we talked a lot of politics wherever we all were.
I bet you did. Did you know when you married Governor Vandiver that was going to be the path that...
Heavens, no. I thought we were going to live in Winder the rest of our lives.
He was going to
practice law, and I was going to do what they do, you know, in Winder. Join the woman's club and do those kind of things, but it just didn't work that way.
I know he was appointed state adjutant general by Governor Talmadge in '47. Was that what got things started? But he was mayor of Livonia.
No, he was mayor of Livonia before we were married. I believe that was in like 40.
He was 27 as well.
Well, if it's 27, he was born in 18. You figure that out, 18, 28, 38, 40, 35, 45. Must be 45.
So he was governor.
So as soon as he came back, the mayor died, and he ran for mayor and was elected, and was the youngest mayor in the country at one time.
Did he get bitten by the bug then, do you think, or was it
living I think he'd had the bug. I didn't know he had the bug, but I think he had had the bug
came with the bug.
Well, his daddy, I think, planted the seed and it grew. I'll put it that way.
Well, now the Vandivers, when I was doing my little bit of research, I read that the Russells and the Vandivers coming together was quite a political...
Well, it caused some consternation. I had one aunt that said, "You're gonna marry a Talmadge man?" And I said, "Yep, that's the way it goes." And it was really, it didn't bother me, so I don't.
Well, it seems like it worked out pretty well.
I overcame.
Oh, well, so he was the state adjutant general in 1947.
No, that was 48. We married in 47 and moved to Atlanta. Ernie was the campaign manager for the 48 campaign. And we moved to Atlanta that summer for him to be the manager. And then we had Chip that in September. In fact, he was born one week. He was born 1 week before the election.
Well, that's good timing. You got him here, and then you got that election.
Well, as a matter of fact, we were renting a little house, and the lease was up on August the 31st. And I told her, I am not going to the Henry Grady and walk around that hotel the whole time, waiting for a baby to come. I'm going to have that baby before I leave. And we did. We went to the hospital on August the 31st, and Chip was born on the 1st.
You had
timed it just right.
You did.
Mm-hmm.
To talk a little bit about the lieutenant governor campaign, how that got rolling, and
well, it was really a one-man show, because this is really the lieutenant governor. See, we'd only had 2 or 3 in Georgia. I forgot now. I think Marvin Griffin was lieutenant governor, and Emmy Thompson might have been. Anyway, it was a kind of a new thing, and there were 4 of us in the race. And as I say, it was a one-man show. It was a year that they also had like 6 people running for governor, 6 or 7, and lieutenant governor could not get up a crowd. There was no way. So you hit the governor's big speeches on Saturday, and then you spoke to the Lions Club and the Rotary and the Kiwanis during the week, and then you ended up at a big rally on Saturday. And of course, now we talk about it, there was no air conditioning in the car. Oh, yeah. Hot.
Sticky.
And you know the frizzy permanents. Well, by the time you got where you were going, it was just kind of sad, because you had to leave the windows down.
A lot of barbecue.
Oh, a lot of barbecue. And because Ernie, bless his heart, as he used to call it, it was on the ham and English pea circuit.
Yes.
Because that's where every civic club had. But that was an intense race. There were 4 of us in the race. And like I say, it was a new office, more or less, but it certainly had led to the governorship.
Right.
So you kind of knew where you were aiming.
Well, I know that Governor Vandiver was elected by the largest margin ever in 1958, so
that's right.
You did a good job working up to that.
Well, and he worked, and he was a good lieutenant governor, and he was a good adjutant general. Actually, they built more armories during his 6 years. See, he was 6 years,
mm-hmm.
and that's a long time for anybody to be somewhere so that they can get a program started and completed.
Right.
And he started the armory program. Because at that time, y'all have to remember, we were getting close to civil defense was being stressed.
Concern about the Cold War concerns.
Cold War, and well, we didn't know what was going to happen.
Right.
Because there was a lot of civil defense, and he was also head of the civil defense, so it all kind of worked in together to get the armories going. National Guard grew just tremendously,
mm-hmm.
and of course that was a good basis when he ran for lieutenant governor. He had this wonderful bunch of young boys, young men, that we knew them all, and
mm-hmm.
He knew them all.
A good base there.
Mm-hmm.
He followed Marvin Griffin.
Uh-huh.
I saw a quote that said that Georgia went from a good old boy network to an administration lauded for fiscal responsibility, honesty, and a progressive framework. What a nice thing.
That's the way it was. And it's just, that's the way it was.
That was 59 to 63, and we were awfully lucky.
I think so. I think so.
What was life like in the governor's mansion?
Well, completely different than it is now. Completely. We didn't have help. We had troopers out in the yard, and Chip enjoyed that more than anything, because the troopers were always in the backyard, and he could go out there and
hang out with them.
Hang out with the troopers. And of course, my truancy was small.
Yeah.
When you think about it, Chip was 10, 9, 7, and 5, and Jane started kindergarten when we got to Atlanta. And we were in the old mansion. We were not in this mansion.
Park?
Huh?
Was it in Ansley Park? Is that
yeah,
where?
Ansley Park, and we loved it. People talk about the leaking roof but we made it. It was home.
Right.
And the children, I think they had fun. We all enjoyed Spring Street. And that was such a great school. And they made a lot of good friends, and they keep up with some of them yet. And I love being part of Spring Street School. We had the paper sales, and we had everything. We had the big festivals and the carnivals, and actually it was just like living in any small town if you belonged to Spring Street and lived in Ansley Park. The only rule we had was that the children had to be home by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, because that's when the traffic started getting bad. And they could play and ride the bicycles down the street, and you never worried about them. And see, that's so different than now.
We keep saying it's a different
everything's
world.
Behind the fence. Everything has changed, because back then, and then a plug for Ernie, they talk now, all the first ladies talk about who they entertained, and the princesses and the movie stars and the count, you know, all these people. Because Ernie started the trade mission. He took the first trade mission and got all those countries interested in Georgia. But that was the beginning of the people coming to Georgia. So therefore, we didn't have to worry about them because they weren't coming. And
just home folks.
It really was just home folks spent the night. We did have some, of course. Bobby and Ethel Kennedy spent the night with us one night. A couple, you know, people that were just passing through. A couple of governors that we had met came and spent the night with us, but there were no people, cabinet members from Germany or something coming to check out Georgia.
Tell me what it was like to have the Kennedys in your house.
Well, actually, they were interested in my children, and you know, that's the way to a mama's heart.
Absolutely.
They met all the children, and then they told me about all of theirs.
17 of them.
Yeah, how many ever they had. They told me all about those, and we just had a nice visit. It was just like anybody else coming to spend the night with you.
I know you made it a wonderful, hospitable place to be. So.
Well, we really felt like it was home. And for 4 years, we enjoyed that old house.
There were some tough issues during Governor Vandiver's campaign, and of course the one that for us was the desegregation of the university. Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit about, and I know you were an advisor to him, and you all talked about things. Talk a little bit about that. We did
talk about everything, but I wouldn't call myself an advisor.
Well, I think anytime, I like to say that I'm an advisor to my husband. Now, whether or not he follows up on my advice.
Well, that may be so too, but I know we did talk a lot. We discussed and...
Well, the world was changing then.
So much.
Terrific change, and I know we've talked to several people during this oral history project just about their perspective on where things were. Of course, Governor Vandiver would not allow the school to be closed, which, and my understanding was that basically it was for the youth of Georgia. He was not willing to do that. Talk a little bit about that if you remember some of that.
Well, I think he was so, he so believed that everybody needed an education. Mm-hmm. And you had to have an education. And he knew that the separate but equal was not so. And he knew that it was going to be, and I ought not to be speaking for him, because actually deep down in his heart, I think he firmly believed that time would have worked it out, you know, a bit at a time or something, but not just wham. Mm-hmm. And I really think he believed that. That's just my opinion. But he was so sure that Georgia should not have to go through what Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama had already gone through. He just knew it just would ruin Georgia, and I think it's been proven. Because if you look at Arkansas and Alabama and Mississippi now, they're still behind, and Georgia has become, Empire State of the South, as they used to say.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right.
And it was the hardest thing for him to do, because he was such a honest person, such a intense person, and when he said something, he meant it. And then for him to have to not follow through with his statement and have to just retract it, it was a shock to him, because he knew he had said it, and he usually, whatever he said, he meant, and he acted on it. But this was just something that he had to do to make things right.
And he did, and it did.
It did, and it did. But as he said, it really, in a way, was like signing your suicide note, because you knew that Georgia was not ready for it. I mean, actually, you know, it was not really ready for it, but it had to be to keep it from being so bad it could have ruined the state.
Right, right. You became concerned about the plight of the mentally ill in the state of Georgia during your time, and you were a real advocate for changes there. Tell us a little bit about that. And what made you start?
Well, you know, governors dropped in places, and we dropped in, but I remember Celestine Sibby was with us, and Celestine and I just stood over in the corner and cried. It was the worst thing you've ever seen. I mean,
this was Milledgeville.
Milledgeville. Yeah. Patients were cooking for patients. I remember the flies. I remember the smell. Little old ladies just sitting in chairs up against the wall. Some of them holding stuffed animals. Some of them holding little dolls, you know, and patting them. It was the saddest thing you've ever seen, and it was dirty. It just smelled. I mean, it had a smell about it you could not believe. And on the way back, it was just really, it was the most heart-wrenching thing I've ever seen, I think. And on the way back, we said, what can we do? What is to be done? And that's when we started a lot of things, and it's wonderful. But he got Dr. McKinnon, who was supposedly the nation's authority on running mental health hospitals. And Dr. McKinnon, Irvin McKinnon, and he came down from Nebraska, Kansas, New York. I'm not sure. I can't even remember now where he came from. But he came in and he just revamped. He put the really bad in one place and the women in another, and had changed the way they had a mobile kitchen that could get hot food to every dormitory or every hospital, because they were all broken up into hospitals. And they had we got a portable kitchen that took hot food to every dormitory, rather than the patients cooking for the other patients, or even at that, they had some prisoners cooking for patients. I mean, it was just a better thing. Dr. McKinnon just took over, and he brought in so many people. And then another interesting thing about that, it was about the time of Cuba, when Cuba was an enemy, was becoming an enemy, and so many of their well-trained doctors left Cuba and were looking for places to practice. So they became the nucleus of the great medical help. And then Dr. McKinnon had all of these people who were well-trained down there in Milledgeville, and it really just made all the difference in the world.
Things. I had never heard about the Cuban influx there.
Well, the Cuban, at that time, they were leaving Cuba because they were going to be, you know, impounded or compounded or whatever. And so they came to America, and Dr. McKinnon was in touch with people all over America who knew somebody who knew somebody, and we had a big influx of Cuban doctors who were well trained. And at the time we went down there, I think it was 20 doctors for 12,000 people, which was, if you can imagine it, they couldn't see them. I mean, they couldn't treat them. But then when the Cubans came in, they were able to give like a doctor 2 areas, and he was responsible for those, not just running around trying to do the best he could. So that was a great thing.
Thank goodness y'all dropped in.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, I have to brag on the Georgians. I don't know whether you know about the Chapel of All Faiths or not, but they didn't have a church. They had basketball court and a gymnasium, and they had church on Sunday in the gymnasium. And these poor people did not know the difference. I mean, in a church and a gymnasium and an arena and that kind of thing. And so the first Christmas, after Ernie and I were down there, we came up with this idea of motorcade. And the mayor and the Georgia Municipal Association took it over as a project for them to have the mayor's motorcade to Milledgeville.
And they took gifts down?
And they took gifts, and I have a picture of Ernie and me sitting in a pile of gifts that you cannot believe. Every little town in Georgia sent the mayor and gifts. And we had the greatest day that first Christmas because everybody there got a gift for the first time ever because so many people would just put there and left. So anyway, the mayor's march was the happy, and then not having a church. I remember, Claude would probably remember a lot of these old people, but the churches back then, Louis Newton, gosh, now I've gone blank. Louis Newton and the Methodists. Well, anyway, all the leaders of the different denominations, and Mr. John Sibley, we had a committee because, of course, the preachers in Georgia were upset because there was no place to worship. They didn't know a church from the basketball court. So we started a Chapel of All Faiths drive. And the people of Georgia raised $1 million through contributions. And we had bricks. Maturin used to put bricks, paper bricks, in envelopes, and that's what you sold bricks for your Chapel of All Faiths. It's the most beautiful little church you have ever seen. It has a Jewish side and a Catholic side, and then this huge Protestant middle. And it's just a gorgeous thing. And then we started the chaplaincy program. Because if you had this church, so there for a while, I don't know if it's still that way, but there for a while, every student in a seminary, whichever seminary it was, had to spend a month or a quarter or however they studied in Milledgeville learning to be a chaplain so that they could spot people who needed help before it got so bad that they ended up in Milledgeville. And I remember so well, so many of those young people, young preachers to be, that went to Milledgeville to take a quarter or so of chaplaincy program so they would be able to maybe prevent somebody from going to Milledgeville.
Wonderful.
No, it was a wonderful thing to be working with, because when you think about all the little churches in Georgia, and you'd get an envelope and it'd have 57 cents in it from some little church that had taken up a collection that Sunday. And it really was something to behold.
Everybody chipped in and it grew. I was going to ask you about accomplishments of which you were most proud, and that may be one of the...
That's it. That and getting my children home safe and sound.
Two big things. I was going to say, one of the things I'd like to talk about is your family. I know Chip and Beth and Jane, you want to talk about your children?
Oh, you haven't got time. I'm sorry. What do you want to know? And I'll try to keep it short. They are just my pride and joys, and it's all. It's family is, to me, is everything.
I would agree with you. Talk a little bit about Jane. We know Jane because, of course, in Athens, she's ours. She can be yours, but she's ours too.
She's ours too, but she is. She certainly spends a lot of time in Athens.
I talked to her last week, in fact, and she was on the road again. She said she had to make her phone calls while she was on the road.
She does, but you know the nicest thing is she calls me. When she gets on the road, she'll call me and tell me where she's going, and we'll talk for a little while, and then I can keep up with her. Now, Chip and Beth, they're here in town. Beth is just retired from being a media specialist at the middle school. And of course, Chip is here practicing law, and he has 2 of my grandchildren. And we have a 15-year-old boy that is Chip's baby, but he is just a joy. You know, we're watching him play football, basketball, baseball, and anything else that comes up.
Well, I know you're glad to have him.
And then Beth, of course, Beth and Chip being here, it just means everything to me. And Chip, his family live, he and Michelle live about 3 houses down the street, and so he runs in and out.
That's great. Well, I know Jane is staying busy and is reinvigorating the Democratic Party in the state. And she's doing a good job.
I hope so, because I know that's what she wants to do. Anything my children want to do, I want them to do it and do it well and be, you know, be happy when it's over. So if Jane is happy, that's great. And she is busy. Heavens knows she's busy.
Well, of course, she was busy in Athens before she did this.
Well,
she
was, and David too. They both have just kind of taken to Athens and are both doing constructive things.
Absolutely. You know, we're proud to have them.
Well, thank you.
Let's talk about, you talked about the Kennedys. What memorable people that you've met, and of course, Senator Richard Russell would be somebody to talk about. And you saw him from a different perspective than some of the rest of us.
You know, he was just Uncle Dick. And he loved Lady Betty. He called me Lady Betty, but I was fortunate in that we lived next door to Grandmama and Papa. So anytime any of those 13 children came home, I got to see and be with all of them.
Right.
And I used to fuss because I couldn't spend the night with Grandmother like all the other cousins did. But it was because I lived next door and had to go home. But it was great, and I don't know, they were just uncles, and knowing he cared about me. I think one of the funniest things is one time he went back to Washington, and about 3 days later I got a letter from him, and it was telling me thank you for something or whatever. And he had sent $1, and he said, if you don't mind, I believe you can find a lipstick that suits you better than the one you had on. So he sent me $1 to get a tube of lipstick that he would like, not that he didn't like the one I had on.
How
but
great.
I mean, it was such a close family, and it really, when I think about it, and we just lost the last one this year.
Yeah.
And so and we have one aunt-in-law still living, and we just lost one a couple of weeks ago, 97 years old. And so all those people have just been an inspiration all your life.
Right.
I was a reporter with the Columbus Ledger.
All right. General Phillips, would you spell your name for me, please? Is it Eugene Phillips?
Eugene, Eugene Phillips, Phillips.
All right. And would you like me to identify you as General Eugene Phillips?
And
You're comfortable with everyone, okay.
as you wish.
Are those real daylilies I'm looking at this morning?
Mm.
Those are pretty.
So you coming up on 91?
November. Thanksgiving 1917 I arrived. The last.
It was a good day. This is a Going Back, Remembering UGA interview with General Eugene Phillips, conducted by Fran on May 20th, 2008. Today we're at General Phillips' home in Royston, Georgia. Thank you so much for allowing us to come and visit today.
It's a pleasure indeed to have you all here, and I'm flattered that you were interested in me.
What an interesting, full life you've led and you're leading. But let's start in the beginning. You grew up in this area, didn't you?
Yes. My family has been in Franklin County in northeast Georgia since 1799. And one great-great-great-grandfather arrived in 1792. So we have been here a long time. I was born in Cannon, attended school in Toccoa and Sandy Cross Community Elementary School and Royston before going to the university.
So, local schools, what were some of the earlier influences on your life, General Phillips?
My parents, of course. My mother had been a teacher in her youth, and she inspired me to make the most of my opportunities in the classroom. And my father, of course, urged me to do my best and always do my duty, which I have followed all of my life.
I remember you said your mother had been to the state normal school, but you were the first person who attended college. Is that correct?
Yes, she was.
This would have been during the years of the Depression.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about how you conjured up that pile of resources that allowed you to attend the University of Georgia. What?
I wanted to eventually to get off the farm. It was hard, back-breaking labor, and I thought there was a better life, and that I should study and try to improve myself and do the best I could with what talents I could develop. But it was difficult because it was a very lean economy in those days, and nothing compared to the opportunities our young people have today.
No Hope Scholarship then, of course.
No scholarships. Very, very limited opportunity.
So you worked your way through school? Or?
Yes. At the university, I'm under the auspices of the National Youth Administration, one of the federal programs. I was able to earn $12 a month at 25 cents an hour, and that would feed me most of the month. But I needed $3 more in order to eat every day, so I didn't eat every day. My grandchildren couldn't understand that.
I'm sure they couldn't.
I told them I was hungry all the time.
Oh my. Well, you so you worked and you studied hard. What did the campus look like when you arrived in the 1930s?
It's been almost 3/4 of a century since my first visit to the university to check out the requirements, pick up a catalog. We went to see Ms. Bondurant.
Miss Bertie Bondurant?
Bondurant, yeah.
Uh-huh.
She was the personnel officer, a very gracious lady. She welcomed us. And the campus was at that time not quite as well groomed as it is today, but it looked spacious to us. And my friend Walton Harper and I, who graduated from Royston in May of '35, and we went to college together and were roommates all 4 years. He was in the military also. But we arrived in front of the administration building, and soaring columns of the two old buildings joined together. And we learned about architecture of the Corinthian columns on the Capitol, and the massive Doric columns up on the chapel. At the time we were there, the Tombs Oak was still there, and we were impressed with it. We wondered what he must have said that day when most of the people in the chapel went out to hear him rather than the scheduled speaker. But it was, to us, a beautiful place, inspiring, compared with our bare campus at Royston. Had a two-story high school building, which included the elementary grades, not a sprig of grass on the grounds or anything like that. And adjacent to us was a weed-filled patch 90 yards long on which we played football. And when we got up to the 10-yard line, we had to move back another 10 yards so we could have 100.
To get you 100 yards in.
Yeah, and I played football, high school, not very well. And I have a picture of our team. I think the heaviest one on the team weighed about 150, and I weighed about 115 pounds. But we did have fun, and we learned about good sportsmanship. But I couldn't even have qualified to be water boy for the Bulldogs, but I went to see them at practice.
We had pretty good ball teams in the 30s, didn't we?
Yes, we, as I remember my freshman year, we had a pretty good team. We lost to, actually beat Florida, I believe, that year, but lost to Tech. And in those days, after the Georgia Tech game, whether it was played in Atlanta or Athens, there was a lot of rowdyism and people trying to tear down the goalpost. And I think the legislature finally grew tired of paying the bill for all of this, and they put a stop to it. I didn't participate in that because I figured if you lose, you lose. I had no desire to tear down the goalpost.
Some of that hadn't changed, is the scary part. So.
One thing, in those days, we all received a student ID card, and with that card, you could go to the ball games. My grandson, who graduated a year ago this month, saw one football game because he had to participate in the lottery. It seems to me that the students should be permitted to attend the games. Let some of the other people watch it on television. But we went to the ball games, and the military department hired us boys to park cars, so that was a chance to earn another couple of dollars.
Sanford Stadium certainly didn't look the way it looks now.
It was very small compared to, it was not so vast as it is now.
What was it? It was dedicated in 29. Does
29.
that sound right? So by the time you got there, it had seen some years of use.
Yes, it had. And some of the benches needed replacing.
Right, right. And since then, I think we've had at least 4 or 5 expansions.
Right, but we never missed a game, and
good dog fans. That's what we like. That's what we like. You were a journalism major.
yes.
When did you feel this interest in writing? Is that something that you had during?
Writing always came easy for me, and in spelling I could usually won the spelling bees, and I had written a school column for the Royston Record. And on occasion, I would farm out my talents to classmates when we had a requirement for a theme. And I remember on one occasion where there were 30 members of the class. I wrote every one in the class, and I still had the best. 15 cents a copy.
Well, that was big money.
That's big money in the 30s. So I had some practice in writing.
And so you knew from the beginning that's what you wanted to do.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And was Dean Drury the individual who was heading up the journalism school?
Yes. Dean Drury, fabulous character, a gentleman of the old school, an inspiring man. I loved him. I thought he was a wonderful professor. I wonder he didn't flunk me. We had a skit on Sigma Delta Chi once, and I had to play him. And he used to sit at his desk, and he always turned the pigeon-toed, turned his feet in like that. So I did that, and he told us a story about Mencken, H.L. Mencken, who once wrote a magazine article, The Sahara of the Beaux-Arts. And that's a French word meaning the beautiful arts, he said. So the dean did not get mad at us, but I don't think he was pleased with my performance. But he didn't hold it against me, and finally I was able to graduate. And on occasion he would lend me a book. He didn't do that very often. He had this, you remember his walls were lined with books. He wrote reviews. And he steered me in the right direction, and I enjoyed every day in the journalism school.
He knew he had a good one.
Yes.
He knew he had a good one when he had you,
Yeah.
I guess. Your son suggested that I ask you about a casket ad that you wrote for an advertising class. Does that ring a bell?
Yes. Yeah. Trying to see how the little couplet went. Kraus and Drury casket. Ask the man who's in one. A tasket. Kraus and Drury casket. Ask the man who's in one. So like the old Packard, remember the Packard Motor Company? Ask the man who drives one.
So you did well in your advertising class, and you were a public relations major, is that right?
Oh, no, I was, I don't think we had a PR major as such at that time, but most of journalism graduates drifted in through their connection with newspapers, and I was in the news sequence, and was able to sell an article time to time. My senior year at Georgia, I was the campus correspondent for the Atlanta Journal. Fred Moon was the city editor. I don't know whether you ever met him. He's an old timer. And that was another $25 a month. So I was
you were making big bucks
beginning to get into tall cotton.
Yeah.
Comparatively speaking.
Were there other faculty members that were memorable or had influence on you?
We had a gentleman who really loved drama. Ed Kraus was his name. He was from Wisconsin, always well dressed, immaculate, and always in a hurry. And I didn't have any of his classes, maybe one. But Dean Drury at that time had a 12:30 class, and he used to love to torment us. Some of us had not had breakfast, and he insisted on talking about what he'd had the night before, roast beef and gravy, he would say, and we say.
Stomachs rumbling and drooling, huh?
It was very unfair, we thought.
Did you ever have an opportunity to get to know Dean Tate? Dean Bill
I knew him well. I was very fond of him. I thought he was a fair man. Some of the students didn't like him because they thought he was a little too severe in doling out demerits. But many years later, I went back to the campus on a visit from somewhere, whether the Washington or the West Coast, and I bumped into him in front of the administration building. He remembered my name. I thought that was amazing, absolutely amazing.
He was amazing, and he also, I think, is known for somebody who not only remembers your name, but can ask you about your family.
Yeah. And I had an opportunity over the years to hear him speak at alumni meetings, and it was always delightful to see him.
Tell me a little bit again about where you lived when you were in school.
The first year, I mentioned to you earlier that Camp Wilkins
Mm-hmm.
started out. It was too far away to walk in the rain. We found a place. There was a lady had a boarding house just opposite Joe Brown,
Mm-hmm.
and she fixed up under a little shed outside. She had storage upstairs, and down in this basement was room enough for one double bed and a single bed on top of it, and a couple of chairs. And she rented that to us for very little, and we boarded Miss Durham. But once, when we raided her ice box, she decided she didn't want us around. She ran us off. I didn't blame her. So we had to move to 169 Barber Street. Okay. That house is still there. It's next door to the Potters. And we lived there until the spring. And the next year we were in another boarding house in a building. It stood where the Bob Stevens Federal Building
Right.
is, somewhere in that neighborhood. And finally, in our senior year, we lived at 320 South Lumpkin Street. And it was just across the street from the entrance to behind Lecarte Hall. At that time, it was Lecarte Hall. So that covers my residence.
I think you were amazing to be able to remember the addresses where you were.
I always wanted to live in Old College, but you had to politic a little to get in, and it was only in the spring quarter of my senior year that I was invited to move in and be the fourth boy in that little suite.
Right.
So I stayed at 320 South Lumpkin, where I had a whole room this size to myself. We had another professor, was Willett Kempton, from Wisconsin. All of our assistant professors came for some reason, the University of Wisconsin. Very good school. And we thought he was an impressive and a very learned man. And during the war, I bumped into him once. I think he ended up directing public relations for some federal agency. And he married a Georgia girl, Grace Harrington. So I knew him well. I minored in Romance languages, so I should mention Professor Claude Chance and Dr. Thaxton. They instilled in me a love of French literature and the language. We arranged through French friends and the embassy in Washington to have him decorated by the French government. And for some reason, Professor Chance, who was old and ill at the time, he declined the honor. I was never disappointed. And Louis Desroches, the French exchange student, was helpful in that regard. I should mention the French exchange students. We had several outstanding young men and women who came, and I remember them all and kept in touch with them over the years. Louis Desroches came from Dijon, the capital of Burgundy, where the best food in the world is prepared and the best wine. And at the same time he was there, we had another Frenchman, Jacques Puyatier. He's a typical Frenchman. He had thick glasses, slick back hair, and he was a great gangster. Not gangster, but he'd always pull in some gag, and he had learned how to fall flat on his face, and without hurting himself or even soiling his clothes. So we're going through the reception line to meet the president of the university. He flopped on the floor, but that was not his only claim to fame. He could imitate a siren. Another boy was hailed before the justice of the peace for speeding, And the judge asked him, says, "Why didn't you stop?" The policeman said he turned the siren on, and the boy said, "Oh, I thought it was that crazy Frenchman."
Was Miss Dolores Artow the international, do you remember Miss Artow? She was a person who worked with international students.
Yes, yes.
Little short lady.
Yes.
Vivacious.
Yes. I remember her well. She was a good friend of Ruth. The Italian student at the time, we had two, Dr. Rossi. He was a little older than the rest of us, very learned man. He spoke French as well as Italian. But the one we loved the best was a young girl named Medi Rampoli. Her father had been the secretary of Mussolini's, one of his government bureaus. And she used to tell me, said, "Mr. Phillips, you must study a little more." And in that class, studying Italian was the wife of Professor Forrest Cumming. He taught our survey and physical and mathematics. And they were both later killed. I remember when they had a plane load of dignitaries from Georgia went to Paris and take off coming back. It crashed and burned.
At Orly.
And they were both lost. So Ms. Cumming and Professor Cumming were on that flight. But he's the one, you may have heard of him, he had the students flipping coins to get the law of probability, and they had this contest every spring. I should mention the German students too. I was fortunate enough to be in touch with these students and practice my languages, and they were good friends. And over the years, I was closest to Louis DeRoche. He became an expert in covering the space activities down at Cape Canaveral. And he was assigned to Washington by his French press agency. And he died in 1960. And his widow still lives in Washington. The German students were, I think I can recall them, Herbert Sonthoff. He's a tall, Teutonic, heel-clicking type. He decided not to go home. When the time came to go back to Germany, he knew he'd go right into the army, and he decided not to do that, so he married the pretty daughter of a professor up at Harvard or somewhere. He didn't go home. But Hubertus Scheibe was another German student, and the last one was Peter Wecker, he pronounced it. He was from Heilbronn. Sonthoff was from Dresden, which the city was absolutely destroyed. We had one German girl. She was Louisa Burma. She was from Breslau. I was able to, when I was on duty in Germany, I was able to locate all these people and visit with them, and they visited me in this country. So I was very close to our student. I think we had one Chinese student at that time. I didn't know him, didn't meet him, and one Cuban named Manuel Colon.
So that was the sum total of all of our international students?
Yes.
Is that right? Let's talk a little bit more about your campus extracurricular involvement. I know Tom indicated you were president of Sigma Delta Chi.
Yes, I was a member president. I was a member of Scabbard and Blade was the honorary military organization. I was in the Gridiron, Blue Key. I was historian of Demosthenian and a loyal member all those years. Although I would
rowdy discussions with rowdy debates with Phi Kappa folks, or
I did not actually debate, but I was a kind of the publicity person and the historian. and the backup person for whoever needed help among the officers. Splendid organization.
Have you been in the Demosthenian building
Yes.
in recent years? They've really done a nice job.
Yes. I wonder what happened to this massive portrait of John B. Gordon, General Gordon. It stood against the back wall. It was, you remember it?
Maybe we can check that out for you. See what they've done.
I'd like to see it if it's still around.
General John B. Gordon.
That's where our Georgia Arch was. My freshman year, because of my journalistic connections, I decided to work on the Georgia Arch, and they needed somebody to sell ads, so they named me advertising manager. And the next year, business manager. And my senior year, I was editor of the publication, and I was one of the 4 students who actually founded it. Campus magazines always run afoul of the faculty because of the bawdy humor that sometimes creeps in. But we had a good one. I presented a bound volume of the magazine to the journalism school. I hope it's in the library there.
The Cracker.
The Georgia Arch magazine.
Georgia, we named it the Arch. The previous magazine had been the Georgia Cracker. I think the library probably has a copy of that.
How about the Hitchhikers Association? Tell us about that one.
Well, that's the way I traveled. And I thought if we had an organization and an emblem, we had somewhere here, I have an armband that anyone wearing this armband, you know he's a fine young man and he wouldn't try to rob you or anything, and you'd give him a ride. And nearly every college student at some time hitchhiked, so I thought it would be a testimonial to their character. And also collect 50 cents for the armband, which you pinned on. And the Pandora, the yearbook, had a little sketch of me, a caricature. Says he's off to some college somewhere to establish another chapter of the Hitchhiker. Says, God only knows why. But I met a lot of people, including Russell Long, later in the Senate, who was the son of his father.
Louisiana.
Yeah. And I spent the night with him when I went down. He was one of our University of Louisiana members.
Of the Hitchhikers Association?
Hitchhikers Association. I used to see him when he was in the Senate in Washington and bumped into him frequently, Russell, frequently on airports.
It's a good way to get to know some folks, huh? Hitchhiking and the association. What were the campus politics like when you were at the university?
Fierce. I was in the campus group, not being able to afford a fraternity, assuming I could have been received by the brothers. But we cooperated on really important issues, but we competing for influence. And we did a lot of good work in support of the school and students who needed some direction.
What was going on in the state at the time, General Phillips? Was this the time, was Eugene Talmadge the governor of the state when you were in school?
Yes, during that period, the governor frequently came to the university and other politicians, and through the law students, we were interested in politics, and we thought some of it needed to be cleaned up. I remember one time Governor Talmadge came to and visited the Sigma Newhouse, and Herman was suffering from a hangover, and his son, and they had to hide him. He didn't get to see his father that trip. They made some excuse. Herman was a good friend. My son worked for Herman one summer in Washington. In fact, he has an autographed picture of Herman. I saw him when he passed early. It's interesting, he and Bob Stevens both died at age 88. And so many of my military friends didn't quite make it to age 90. It's interesting.
We're going to talk about Nuremberg in a while, but Bob Stevens was in Nuremberg too
Yes.
at the same time you were.
He was there for one of what we call the big IMT. We had the top Nazi bigwigs were tried in the International Military Tribunal. We had hundreds of reporters from around the world came to cover the proceeding. And he had been a German exchange student himself. He was brought in for that, but he didn't stay until the bitter end because he said his wife, Grace, wanted him at home.
I'd like to see him again, huh?
Yeah. And I was there through the end of the trial. We had the subsequent proceedings. There were 12. We began to prosecute the lesser lights and the generals and the jurists and the doctors and the Einsatz group and the people who the death squads and who ran the concentration camps. Very interesting experience.
I was going to ask you about that. It went on for 4 or 5 years, did it not?
Yes. Finally ended in '49. But I still had the military connection, and the military ran the support operation and the lawyers.
You were the chief public information officer for the Army, is that right?
Yeah. Later, I was the number 2 PR person in the Pentagon, but for the public relations dealing with the press, I was in charge.
So you were there all 4 years?
Yeah.
This was a wonderful opportunity for me to look deeper into that and to look at the different trials. And you're right, the ones you hear about are the ones, or as you said, the big wigs, and then the lesser ones. And I think somebody said the movie, was it Judgment at Nuremberg, was based more on the jurist.
Yes, that's right.
Because what you had was judges who were having to follow the laws that had been made, and yet they knew often that they were. Some
people really didn't think it was fair. So it's the victor punishing the vanquished here, but there's precedent for it. And the things they did were so horrible that somebody had to pay.
Did we have any idea that those things were going on until what?
I think our people knew, but some of the Jewish organizations are critical of the U.S. government for not bombing some of the camps, but most of them were too deep inside German territory. Our planes maybe couldn't have been going in and come out, and you would have killed them, more people on the ground, and you would have liberated. So that wasn't feasible to try to, but the governments must have known what was going on because we had intelligence. So
that didn't start until 46 or 47?
Yeah.
Well, you were out of the service by then, right?
No. I came home after that.
Okay. I had you working at the Milwaukee Journal with the AP folks. So.
I was actually out of the Army for a period of time, and I got recalled to duty about the time of the Japanese occupation. They were sending people over. So that was my interlude with. I had a sister who lived in Milwaukee, and I went up to visit her and got to know the managing editor of the Milwaukee Journal, one of the great newspapers in the country. And he asked me to write something for him, so I did. And I sold him several pieces to earn a little money and keep my hand in. Marvin Krieger was his name. I spent one summer working on the Atlanta Journal as a student. That was a big experience in my life, too.
Let's go back. I want to make sure, is there anything else we want to talk about being on campus, I sort of got us off track when I started talking about Nuremberg. I find it so interesting, so we may come back to that again. But you finished in 39, is
39.
that right? Did we know at the time that we were probably going to end up in a war?
Oh yeah, we all knew. Some of us were anxious to get involved.
And you were heading out to Canada, maybe to. Well, you took off then. Tell us about your time in the Pacific Northwest a little bit. I understand you worked as a lumberjack some. Is that right?
I had picked up a list of university graduates who were living in the West Coast, and I stopped off to see them as I went along. And in Longview, Washington, where I was briefly, did some work for Long Bell Lumber Company. They had a little magazine they were organizing. They called it The Log of Long Bell. And this was 1940, and the mobilization had just begun. So I went from there into the Army, and that takes us through the next few years.
So, and then you were with the third.
One university graduate who was in this San Francisco area had studied veterinary medicine, John K. Perry from St. Mary's, Georgia. And he took me in, and he had this dog and cat hospital. He was very, very hospitable. Seemed glad to see me, and I was so glad to see him. I was freeloading with all of them. So Georgia hospitality is always impressive.
So you entered the service while you were on the West Coast?
Yes. Volunteered.
And then they took...
Send me in, Coach.
Right.
I'm ready. I'd had only one 6 weeks tour before that with the 6th Cavalry at Fort Oglethorpe.
Well, did you enter as a second lieutenant then?
Yes.
Okay. And you ended up with the 3rd Infantry Division?
Yes. My first leave orders were signed by a gentleman named Dwight D. Eisenhower, Lieutenant Colonel. He did better than I did for rank. He ended up with 5 stars later.
Oh, talk a little bit about your time. I know you were in North Africa and Italy. Talk a little bit about that. And then let's talk about the PR work that you did while you were in the service during the war.
The 3rd Infantry Division trained on the West Coast from Fort Lewis. They went down to Fort Ord in California. And the authorities changed their strategy. They decided we would not go to the Far East. The Japanese, we'd have to fight them later. So they're going to shift us to Europe. So we started this amphibious training. And our mechanized cavalry platoon, troop rather, trained in rubber boats. We'd land at night in Monterey Bay and work our way inland. And the Monterey Bay is a natural harbor, and it very much resembles the man-made harbor at Fadala, French Morocco. So our unit was to land in boats, small boats, in Morocco on November the 8th, 1942, and take out a fixed gun called Battery Blondin. They had 6-inch guns. And this would enable the troops to land without being shot up. And the Navy was to fire a salvo over the beach and to try to discourage the French from shooting us. In order to identify ourselves, we all wore an armband of the U.S. flag. I still have one, probably the only one left. But the French didn't like it. They did shoot at us, but it only lasted a couple of days. But the Navy, because of the smoke and the fire and the confusion, they could not see our signal. We had a little weapon called a Very pistol, and we'd fire a little green rocket. And when they saw the green flares, they were to lift their fire. They didn't do that, so that was friendly fire was our first kill on the beach. We had a chaplain killed on the beach too. He was trying to helped somebody a soldier who'd been wounded, and a shell fragment shrapnel killed him. And after 3 days, excuse me, we captured Casablanca, and Patton had come into town, and with my platoon, we led the first patrol into Casablanca. It got to be a habit. We always operated out in front of the division, and we complained bitterly that we were getting shot at by both sides. The enemy's shooting at us, and when you fire over our heads, they sometimes fall short. So lift your fire.
And it moved there, then all the way through Sicily and Italy,
yes.
right?
Another boy from Georgia was in the troop at Fidela. After things settled down, I bumped into an engineer unit, and there was Bill Gunner from Commerce, Georgia. He'd been a law student. He's later on the Supreme Court of Georgia, and he died a few years ago. So I said, "Wouldn't you like to be back in the cavalry?" He'd been in the horse troop at the university, and he said, "Sure." So with his patrol and my patrol, we were always ahead of the division, and the Associated Press wrote up several stories about these Georgia lieutenants who were always the first into the city, including Palermo in Sicily. And between battles, the G1, the personnel officer of the 3rd Division, drafted me to write the citations for heroism, and I wrote most of the citations for the Medal of Honor. The 3rd Division won, I believe, 39 of the 40 Medals of Honor, most of them posthumous. And one was from a boy in my troop from California named David Weber. And that was a somber job, but one I enjoyed doing very much. We had to talk to members of the unit and find out exactly what had happened on a particular occasion and verify the information so that they could be rewarded for it.
Gosh, 39 out of 40. Tough.
This division is just coming back from their 3rd trip to Iraq. In fact, they captured Baghdad in the first one. Mm. And they had one soldier, a sergeant, received the Medal of Honor. It cost him his life in the Baghdad. You may have read about it. Smith was his name.
Talk to us a little bit about how your responsibilities changed from the time that you were doing that to going on to the public relations staffs of
I spent, during the combat phase of World War II, with my division, I spent 511 days in combat. Not continuously, but cumulative. But most of my years in the military service was interspersed with going to school. The Army keeps trying to educate us. So, I went to the Cavalry School, the Armor School, the Communications School, Command and General Staff College, the War College. It takes a lot of years. All of these help produce a rounded military officer, and I enjoyed them all.
And you ended up with, during the war, I guess this was toward the end of the war, General Phillips, you ended up on General Eisenhower,
yep.
Bradley, and Patton's public relations staff. Is that right?
At the very end of the war, I was on General Patton's staff, again dealing with the press, because I knew so many of them and had been a newspaper man myself. After the fall of Paris, the capture of Paris, I was assigned to General Bradley's headquarters at Verdun. And this was just a big headquarters staff. They called the 12th Army Group. And again, the 3rd Army needed me with their troops, so I was called back down there. And the Eisenhower connection came during the North African period. Mm-hmm. It was called AFHQ, Allied Force Headquarters, and at Algiers. And the divisions sent liaison people to help out with the press coverage and escort the reporters around the coverage.
So you ended up with that duty a lot.
Yes. And after, in the Battle of Kasserine Pass in February of '43, the Germans had mauled us rather badly, and we had killed a lot of people and destroyed a lot of material. And they sent General Patton in to straighten out the mess. You've seen the movie. Mm-hmm. They asked for volunteers to go up and replace the casualties, so I went with that group and fought with the 9th Division for the rest of the North African campaign. Went back to my division and went in on the Sicilian operation. And as we started out from Italy, I went back to England and went in with Patton on the invasion of France.
Tell us that story again about when President Roosevelt had come secretly to...
The president and Mr. Churchill agreed to meet and discuss strategy at the Anfa Hotel in Casablanca. And he came to visit the nearest division headquarters. We had troops who landed in Algiers, in Algeria, and on the coast of Morocco, so he came to us, being closer, and to inspect the troops and to meet with General Patton. And again, my platoon drew the job of being the honor escort, and we didn't shoot him.
That was the first good thing. Huh?
The Secret Service was afraid we might attempt it, but.
And you got to know, I think, General Patton. You said.
Yeah.
In a personal.
Well, we had close contact with him. He's colorful. His language was sometimes a little rough, but George Scott, I thought, was magnificent in portraying Patton in the role. But George Scott's voice is deep and masculine. Patton had a high-pitched voice, and a lot of people attributed his habit of swearing to the fact to cover up his squeaky voice. But he tried to award people for performance, and he didn't have any time for anybody who was slack in meeting his obligations. And I'm sure he deeply regretted slapping the soldier, but he was upset. And
he had a colorful, certainly had a colorful history, I guess you could say. So, but you found him to be a person who
we could
respected somebody who was doing working hard.
Yeah. He got along very well with the Sultan, they call it, the Sultan. Went to call him, they could chat in French. And the Arab king, of course, was fluent in French, but he had an official interpreter who translated into Arabic back and forth. And Patton chatted with him in French, of course. Pretty good French. He had studied at the Sorbonne and at the military school.
And you were fluent in French, so you knew what was going on.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about anything else we need to say about your wartime experience before?
I must mention Casablanca before we leave. At the embassy there, and it was actually in Rabat, the Italian embassy. They had this huge German Shepherd, and I liked the dog, and he followed me home. And we had him for several years, and I have a wire photo which is showing me and the dog in a trench, and we called him Il Duce, which is Italian for leader.
Mr. Mussolini's name as
Yes.
well.
Yes, that's what.
So the dog just took up with you, huh?
Yeah, he was hungry, I guess. Dogs like me.
Oh. You came back after the war, but you were still in the service, or you were out briefly? Still in the service after?
I had one more school after that.
And then at that point, it would have been close to Nuremberg, and you were called in or called back to work that.
Yes.
What was your responsibilities related to Nuremberg?
Take care of the press, be sure they had access to the lawyers and the documents. The documents filled this room for every trial. Incidentally, I arranged for a complete set of the documents to repose in the library.
Right. I think they're in our law library. Are they in our
yes,
law? Yeah, that's wonderful. One of the, just a few institutions that have those.
Four depositories. One in Washington, Harvard, University of Arkansas, and University of Georgia.
When we see the way that some of the military tribunals are being discussed today, with the things that are going on, I take it that the British, the Russians, the English, the French, and the United States decided how to try.
Yes.
Yes. The four countries decided how to try, and it was basically a military tribunal, was it not? Or run by the military.
Yeah, it was a military
civilian
tribunal.
Judges.
An international military tribunal. The Russians sat on it too, on the big trial.
I looked at the defendants. It was a wonderful opportunity. I'm a history major. Wonderful opportunity for me to delve into that. Were you actually in the courtroom while that was going?
Frequently.
What was your 3 or 4 reactions to just the things you saw, the people you saw?
One wondered how these people could abrogate their responsibilities to humanity to do some of the things for which they're responsible. But the Germans claimed, and the ministries, the State Department people representing the German government, they said, we just did our duty. We were following orders, which is no excuse, and that's why we hanged some of them.
Right. Right. Goin committed suicide?
Yeah. Yes, Goin did.
I guess Hitler and who? Hitler and...
Hitler was a suicide.
There were 2 or 3 others at the Was Himmler tried, or was he also?
Well, Himmler went into the British headquarters to turn himself in, but the clerk he talked with didn't understand German, so he took his pill, the cyanide, and killed himself. And later, Rommel was forced to commit suicide because Hitler was after him for being part of the conspiracy.
Part of the plot.
And he promised him if he'd give him a nice funeral and take care of his family if he'd just quietly disappear.
Interesting. Well, sometime when you got a day off and I've got a day off, I would love to talk to you about some of the...
Be delighted to.
It was just so interesting but also conducted, I thought, in a way that everybody felt like was because of certainly some of those people were exonerated. Or at least did not have to serve any time, a couple of those people, am I right? You also worked, and were you in the military during the Marshall Plan, the point at which you were doing public information for the Marshall Plan?
Yeah, I was in the embassy in Paris as an attaché, and a lot of the military people were involved in different administration of the program, and I was one of those who was drafted primarily because of my newspaper background.
And what, just making people aware of what the Marshall Plan was and what was
yes,
going on?
And they sent me around to the different countries participating in the plan to assist with promoting the publicity. The story didn't always get out of the source of this aid, and we wanted to get credit for it, in other words, and be sure that it was properly distributed.
Everybody understood.
It was a good program. They had what was called the counterpart fund. The local governments put up in their local currency the matching the money that we had paid for the stuff we were sending. Pretty good arrangement.
Matching,
Yeah.
sort of matching grants,
Yeah.
huh? And you in Burma also?
I was the attaché in the embassy there when we were watching developments in Saigon. I thought at the time that we should have helped the French at the time of the Dien Bien Phu. But our president at the time didn't like the French and thought the colonialism had had its day, so had we stepped in, we might have postponed some of the later difficulties.
Yeah.
And we reported back on developments. But I would have preferred to have been in Saigon where you had the French influence. They learned to cook, and you had, and the Burmese learned from the British.
So you would have the good food in Saigon, huh? When now did you leave the service?
I actually retired all connection in '77.
Okay, but you worked for Delta Airlines.
Yeah, that was during the period I was
In the reserves?
Between them.
Did you go?
I had total service of 34 years and active in reserve.
You left after your work with the Marshall Plan. Then was that when you went to work for Delta?
Yes.
And you worked for Delta for about 7 years, was my understanding?
No, about 5 years.
And what did you do there? You worked on their public relations staff?
Yeah, PR.
Was Delta ready when you were? Was that your?
Yeah. In those days, it was.
It's a different story.
I was a speechwriter for the president, and I'd done a lot of speech writing for the Army.
So you were back closer to home, back in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And then I understand you went to work in 1960. You were the director of the Aerospace Corporation office in Washington, D.C. Is that right?
Yes.
Tell us who was Aerospace?
Aerospace was the architect engineering firm that handled a lot of classified Air Force projects. The Air Force didn't have the engineering staff to prepare. And we dealt with the Congress and with the press to be sure that the space program was covered. And aerospace as part of it was accurately described.
Okay.
And then you had your own public relations firm.
Yes.
2 different firms, is that right?
Well, as mentioned, Ken Ewell had been the #1 PR person in General Motors. And his boss retired, who was 1 year too old to succeed as the president of the corporation. And he had nothing to do for about a year, so we teamed up to represent some clients in Washington. And Earl Koch was a university class of 42. He and I were friends from college days. He was the first World War II veteran to head the American Legion and had a lot of political connections. So we were in business until his death.
And that you started together in '65, is that right?
Yeah.
And y'all were you were in Washington.
Yeah.
Well, then I saw that you came home to Royston and you were the city manager.
First one. the city, which is about a $3.5 million operation every year, they had always done business of our committee. Members of the city council, in addition to making a living, had some civic responsibility. The system was not working too well, so they asked if I wouldn't help them get organized, and I said, "I'll give you 1 year, no more than 2 years." So we went in, and before that time, we'd rolling over the note at the bank every year. And that first year, we ended up with $33,000 in the black. So from that time on, things have improved. I stayed there almost 2 years and hired a university graduate, Frank Goin, who's now manager of Franklin County. He succeeded me. Had lunch with him today at Rotary. That accounts for that.
So
That's my only municipal experience.
That was enough, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Have I left out any of your professional career that we need to talk about? What an amazing life, General Phillips. You a diversity and of tasks and responsibilities, and
we've done a lot of traveling at the taxpayers' expense.
A lot of traveling
around the world. I was able before we severed connections with the government, I was able to take my wife and visit some of the battlefields that we had fought on, and that was an interesting experience.
Well, certainly.
Oh,
okay.
Incidentally, I organized the first 50th anniversary of the journalism class in Georgia, 1989, I guess. 6 of us showed up, and since that time, 3 have passed away.
Lost 3 of those.
So Claude Davidson was one of those who attended, and Bill Forehand, who ended up being a judge, and Regina Rapier from Social Circles, she's passed away. She was there. So Charlie Thorpe and I are the last 2 remaining. And Tom Russell was the host, and he said he was going to continue this. I don't know whether they have or not. It's a nice idea, don't you think?